Have you given any thought to contributing to the melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth's merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander. Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. The tedious art of dot connecting is time-consuming and is driven by a willingness to fathom that not only is the world not quite what it seems, but that it is most likely much more complex and incomprehensible than we are able to even fathom. But one can try. Not everyone is cut out for it, though, as it can lead one into some pretty deep and dark places. The trick is to be able to put these dots that one connects into a much larger perspective and realize that even the dots, much less the abstraction that connecting them seems to form, is ultimately illusory. Today's guest, Chris Knowles, is not only known for his dot connecting skills, but has been writing and musing about such things for over 16 years on his Secret Sun blog. This is his second appearance on The Melt, and he's here to discuss his most recent book that compiles 70 published and 7 new essays from his blog, which is titled The Endless American Midnight: Dispatches from the Secret Sun. I start off the conversation by asking Chris what inspired him to want to compile such a book.
Well, it's actually something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and part of which is that people are always asking me about it. People are always going, well, you know, I have a hard time going through all this stuff online, in particular when people are browsing more and more on their phones, and it gets very hard to read, you know, especially when I would do like really long posts or long series. It just gets very hard to read. And it's just something I just struggled with for a number of years, because it's just like I have so much material on so many different topics. And it's like, where do you start? And then I run into the problem where, like, you know, I'm not going to get permissions for a lot of the visual material. So I'd have to concentrate more on the essays. But, you know, then when everything just started going kerblooey in 2020, you know, it kind of solved the problem for me, because I was just like looking at, you know, what a clusterfuck everything was becoming. I mean, a lot of that was just, you know, it was all orchestrated. It was all orchestrated by the, you know, the intelligence and security agencies to get rid of Trump. You know, it was just to build up this long, grueling period of stress in American history. It was all completely artificial. I mean, it still is all artificial. It was all completely contrived. But that just that mood, that sort of apocalyptic mood that was really taking hold in the late spring and early summer of last year, it just made up my mind for me. And I really was just trying to look at, like, where are we? How did we get here? What led us to this point? What is kicking out the tires from underneath the American jalopy, so to speak, or, kicking out the struts from the, what is destroying the foundations of this country, and just destroying any future we have as an operant culture and society. And I just went back, and when I was sort of tracing this stuff over the years, and and it's interesting too, because a lot of it was written when I was in really bad shape, health-wise. So it was kind of like, screaming into the void, so to speak. And but it suited the mood. But I didn't want to write I did write some new material, but most of it is just edited archival material. But I didn't want to put together a book that was a feel-good book. It was, I wanted to sort of write this bracing Jeremiah as to where we are and where we're going, and this endless American midnight that we're all being thrown into.
Ever more than ever. My God, it just seems to be getting darker and darker.
Oh yeah, it certainly is. But it's part of it is manufactured, and part of it is just like it's an inevitable cycle that empires go through.
Sure.
And we're really in that late imperial period right now. I'd actually put a poll up on Twitter. It's like, what period are we in? As far as comparing to Rome, are we in the collapse of the Republic? Are we in the crisis of the third century? Or are we at the collapse of the Western Empire? And most people pick that, And then I was like, well, what period of Russian history are we in? And everybody seemed to think that we're in the Yeltsin era. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, we are really seeing in real time, you were talking about the manufactured aspect of that, how fucking effective it is. My God. I mean, it's really obvious to see how spoon-fed and how unquestioning and how much people seem to trust all of these institutions that many of them beforehand held in question or were critical of, or, would kind of talk around the water cooler about in sort of a derogatory tone. But now everybody's all lined up and they're listening.
Oh, it's like an inversal.
Yeah.
I mean, you have liberals and Democrats who worship the CIA, worship the military, worship war, worship aggressive war, elective war, worship surveillance, worship McCarthyism. It's just really stunning. It's beyond Orwellian. It's, to me, it's really lapsing into the demonic realm. That so many people who define themselves in certain ways politically have come to embrace everything that their forebears would have disdained or rejected.
Exactly.
Or fought against,
For sure. It seems like partisan politics are kind of what it's all clustered around too, which is kind of disappointing. Like, are we just two categories and then we just, blindly cling to whichever one we closest align to? Like it doesn't.
I think that's like almost like a red herring. I think the point is that people have been so gaslighted and mind controlled. And, we really have to face the fact that, we have a generation of people who are, a large number of whom are sick, mentally sick, and also mentally sick and physically weak. And that was not by accident. That was, a number of different factors that fed into that. So, I mean, we're really at a situation now where people are just very different, you know? I mean, it's by no means all, or maybe even a majority, but it's enough of a plurality that, these people have been socialized since birth with, the daycare system, and have learned to submit to the group and submit to authority, and so on and so forth. And, they were able to sort of pretend that they were being, what they call the resistance, the rebellion, when Trump was in. Trump's just this buffoon, just blundering around. And they were able to pretend, this whole LARP, this whole cosplay LARP, that they were rebels against this, who, for all his bluster, was actually a very weak and ineffectual president, and certainly had no authority over anything. I mean, this nonsense about him being authoritarian is just drivel spoon-fed to them by the media. I mean, Trump was, a very, very weak president, and had no real bully pulpit, and was not able to bring any, what they call the swamp, this whole idea of drain the swamp. He was never able to drain the swamp. I mean, the swamp drained him of blood, You can't just waltz in to Washington, this imperial state, this fortress, so to speak. You can't waltz in when things are just done a certain way, and then you have the system with all these lifetime unelected bureaucrats and so on. I mean, they just made mincemeat of him from day one. But so many people are so stupid and weak and gullible, and let's just say, in a lot of respects, I mean, evil, that they were able to be programmed with this nonsense that he was like some new Hitler, when, I mean, he couldn't even control his own White House. It was just absurd and embarrassing. And anybody who fed into that, and anybody who helped that process along, should be embarrassed and ashamed for creating a situation now where we have, actual totalitarianism looming over our heads. We have this weak, sick, incredibly senile old puppet who, the other day, what did he say? They just wiped my butt or something. I mean, yeah. He said that he's just like this weird nightmare fake president. And, but it doesn't matter, because, the country is being run by, the generals and the corner offices of the intelligence agencies. And, and when people talk about big tech or the big banks, I mean, big tech and the big banks exist at their ledger. You know what I mean? It's big tech is so clearly, I mean, if you just look at the roots of big tech was a military project from day one. So when I talk about the military, people think, oh, my brother's like this conservative guy, and he was in the Marines, for 20 years. And it's like, that's not the military. The military that's not what it is. I mean, it's the real military are the generals and the admirals, and they're nothing like that, as we've come to see. But I just find it really interesting during the election that when everybody was sort of figuring out that this senile, inarticulate old coot was doddering and tottering, that we had him all being bolstered by the real government, which is the intelligence agencies and the military and certain bureaucracies, State Department and so on. I mean, we live in a national security state. I don't understand why people can't accept that. I mean, we live in a national security state, and the national security apparatus controls everything. It controls the banks, it controls the corporations, it controls big tech, and we're living in exactly what Eisenhower warned us against. I mean, they even control Hollywood, I mean, they have taken control over every institution in this country. And we saw with Trump, again, this, for all his bluster, was just very weak and ineffectual. And now we have another weak and ineffectual president, being supported. We had one being opposed, and now one being supported by the national security state. But that's the power in this country, and you see it. The mask will come off, when it has to. You know what I'm saying?
It seems like it's already off as far as I'm concerned. But, I have a definite viewpoint about this that is not shared by most of the people that have Biden stickers on their cars. This is, and he's just bringing in all of this woke agenda, and people are lapping it up. The people that were part of the resistance movement when Trump was president are just loving Biden just because of his talk, whether he's able to walk that or not. And
whether he's not even able to talk. I don't know if you saw that
sure.
that town hall that he had.
Yes.
And it's frightening.
Yeah.
It would be frightening if I thought for a millisecond that he was running anything. And it's interesting too, because Biden's always somebody that I'd always been pointing out to people, like, when they were talking about Hillary or the Clintons or whatever, I was like, keep an eye on this guy. And when he was chosen as Obama's vice president, quote unquote, vice president in the Dick Cheney mold, I wasn't surprised at all, because that's just how the system works. You know what I mean? And he's somebody who's been in the system since the early 70s. And, and he was mentored by all these old Dixiecrats, these super, bigoted Dixiecrats from day one. Excuse me. And, but here we are. He's not the same man he was, even just 5 years ago.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. What do you think about those when people post photographs and compare the old Biden to the new Biden, like he is physically different? Do you think that?
Well, he's older.
Sure.
He's an old man. People change when they get old, and people in the public eye will undergo a lot of plastic surgery and all this other kind of stuff with makeup and so on. It's after a point, your skin gets old and it loses its elasticity. You see this with certain actors and actresses who are constantly getting facelifts up until it's way past the point of being wise to do so, because their collagen has just broken down. I love Burt Reynolds, the late Burt Reynolds, but he's a prime example of this, And a lot of these people just spend too much time out in the sun, because they think they look better on television with tans, which is, why Trump was always doing the spray on tan stuff. So, I don't think that he's like a doppelganger or something, or, like an android replacement or something. I think he's old, and that's just that's what happens to people when they get old, especially when they spend a lot of time in public and they have to be, made acceptable to be on camera.
Well, it seems like that was a big QAnon trope when they were confessing that all these people were.
What isn't?
They've co-opted all the good ones.
This is one thing I keep saying about QAnon, is that I remember when that stuff started out, I was like, this is just like Benjamin Fulford 2012. This is the stuff that Fulford and Wilcock and, all these kinds of people were saying back in like the late 2020s or whatever, you know what I mean? Like late 2000s, early 2010s. I was hearing all this stuff about like the cabal and the arrests. This stuff, it's just what QAnon did is that it just sifted through all these different internet conspiracy memes and then just kind of combined them into this gestalt, but it was all stuff that I had heard before. I remember like there was at one point where like people were sending me emails and stuff because they were like, I don't even remember what it was, but they're like, oh, they're clearly just lifting stuff from the Secret Sun. You know what I mean? And I get these people who are like, oh, because I've been talking about the whole 17 thing since 2006, you know what I mean? And they're like, oh, well, you're just taking that from Q. And I was like, no. First of all, like when I talk about 17, it has nothing to do with Q.
Yes.
And it has nothing to do with any of that stuff. You know what I mean? So, I don't know.
Yeah, it was a weird phenomenon. I mean, I guess it still is a weird phenomenon. I'm not going so strong because Trump is not in a position of power anymore. But
yeah, but I read those drops and it would be like the most milquetoast pablum. I hear all these people like that guy at the Daily Grail is always screaming about, first of all, why does he give a shit? He's Australian. What business is it of his? But it's just like, did you ever read the shit? It's just like, it's so generic. It's just, it reminds me of like a Ronald Reagan campaign ad from like 1982 or something. I mean, it's just so bland and just, but just the fact that so much of it was just, this cobbling together of things that have been floating around for so long, and it's like, hey, listen, maybe if I was smart, I would have jumped on the Q bandwagon. I probably would be making a lot more money than I am now, but it's just like, and when I have these like idiots, these fucking idiots go, oh, you're just a closet crypto Q guy. And it's like,
What?
Shut the fuck up.
What?
You know what I mean? It's like, shut your fucking stupid pie hole. It's like, what's the matter with you? But it's just the brainwashing and the programming.
Well, I mean, they kind of enveloped in at least as far as the mainstream public is concerned, they encapsulated what everybody hates about conspiracy theories. So they became the scapegoats. Like, anybody starts talking anything that sounds remotely wacky or different than the narrative, then you could just lump them up as QAnon or. It just became a convenient scapegoat for anybody who had some wacky idea.
Well, I have a reader who really put it best, and it's something that I hadn't even considered at the time. But he just basically said, I mean, not in so many words, but this is just a pacification program. It's because it was always like, trust the plan, we're taking care of it. The arrests are coming,
Yep.
The White Hats are in charge, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The Patriots are in charge, all this, just sit back, don't do anything, just let it all happen. It was, it was pacification. It just taught, their followers just to be docile
Sure.
and inactive, and it was exactly what they shouldn't have been doing. So, yeah, I mean.
And it put Trump in a savior position, which was
it was grotesque.
Yeah.
It was grotesque. But, it's funny because there was this whole thing with these alleged Michigan militia types were going to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, put her under arrest. And then you find out that this was all just the FBI. It was all just their plants and their informants and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, anytime something like Q or the alt-right or any of this stuff pops up, my first inclination is just to assume that it's just an op.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's always an op. You know what I mean? Just anytime you hear about like, Patriot Prayer or Proud Boys, anything. And, it turns out that that's what it is. I mean, we'll hear like, oh, this Proud Boy leader was an FBI informant. And it's just, it never fails. It's just a very old tactic. It's straight out of COINTELPRO. In the 60s, they did the same thing with the civil rights movement. They did the same thing with, Muslims in the post 9/11 period. They did the same thing with the militias in the 90s, and now they're doing the same thing with, these invisible legions of white supremacists or whatever.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
The kind.
But when it's like when I look at, listen, I'm not going to name names. When I look at like who these alt-right leaders were, and then I look at their backgrounds, I'm just like, this guy's resume looks like, the classic resume of a CIA agent, So why don't people see that? Because people want to get caught up in the LARP, they want to get caught up in the drama. They want to get caught up in this. I think a lot of these people even realize that it's all just a LARP, but it's just like, hey, it's exciting. The government gives you permission, during these Black Lives Matters or Antifa protests, to just go out and just break shit, and burn shit down, and you can get away with it. So it's like, I don't even know how many of those people even care about these causes. I think a lot of, like, for instance, Antifa, I think a lot of it is, it's like, I say Antifa is like half mental patients, half FBI cadets, and it's true, but it's like, why, listen, if you can get away with, like, smashing up a bank or, burning down a police station, why wouldn't you?
Sure.
The government is just basically going on television and giving you permission to do so. And then, coming out and saying, we'll bail you out and we're going to start this defense fund. It's just all fake. It's all fake. And this is like the thing, like, well, I can't get excited or upset about politics or anything anymore, because it's so clearly just, we're past this point where it's like we're through the looking glass, you know what I mean? It's like we're in the funhouse now, and everything is just like this weird either inversion or just like distorted mirror image of reality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
so, I don't know.
Many people are just watching it from their echo chambers and choosing to view it in whatever fragmented way that their, identity group allows them to see it.
Whatever. Listen, if it gets them through the day, Godspeed. You know what I mean? I what am I going to say?
Sure.
It's like, whatever, the thing that concerns me is just this, this whole process, where anybody who doesn't go along with the agenda is being demonized. You can demonize them as Q, you can demonize them as alt-right, you can demonize them as white supremacists, whatever. It's classic divide and rule politics.
Oh my God, yes.
It's almost textbook. We're sort of seeing like this textbook version of this. But it doesn't matter, it doesn't, and I'll tell you why it doesn't matter, because like I was telling you before we started recording, we're going to be lucky if we have the internet in 10 or 15 years. We're really reaching the point now where, things are just starting to wobble. The entire system is starting to wobble. And it's to me, it's just a matter of time before we start reaching cascading failure, where failure just feeds into failure, and it just becomes this kind of loop, this cycle that we can't break out of, like a whirlpool or something. And I listen, it's inevitable right now. Because look at all these social trends. It's like, the incredible epidemic of mental illness, the incredible epidemic of autism and autism spectrum disorders, collapse in birth rates, worldwide. Look at Asia. These Asian countries that 30 years ago Ross Perot was saying were the future. They don't have a future. Specifically, I'm talking about like Singapore, Japan. Like very urban, highly urbanized, highly technologically advanced cultures. They're not even at half replacement anymore. And it's like, how do you sustain that? You can't sustain it. And we just have like all these people. I don't know how much of it is like people just taking for granted that the things are always going to be the way they are, and they just will themselves into existence, and advanced technological society is never going to go away, or a death wish, just like a culture-wide civilizational death wish. It's one of the two,
Well, I think, that could be the death wish part of that. That seems like a logical conclusion to a society that continues to, we're, instead of moving towards anything remotely spiritual or remotely self-reflective, we're completely going into material reductionist scientism, atheism, like all of.
No, we're past that. No, see, here's the thing. We're past that. That's what we were going into 10 years ago. Now, like we're going to into is like this really feeble, I see this with younger kids. It's like the whole new age thing, or a dumbed down, hand-me-down dollar store new age thing is much more prevalent, but it's been combined with like the trans thing and like the whole sexual dysphoria thing, and just the whatever, it's like when I hear these things, when people just start describing themselves in these just bizarre made up sexual identities, I just automatically assume that they're not having sex, It's like people who are actually having sex with other human beings, they don't describe themselves that way.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
They've got a lot of alone time.
It's a lot of kids who are isolated, a lot of kids are on the spectrum, and just this weird peer pressure and social media. I mean, if we do survive this, if we survive this as a civilization, what's bearing down on us, if we survive it, none of this stuff is going to be allowed. You know what I mean? It's just so many things that we take for granted now, or that have sort of come into the existence over the past few years. They're just not going to be allowed. We are going to have it, like I say, if we do survive this crisis that we're barreling towards, you're not going to have social media. Internet access is going to be strictly controlled. All this kind of stuff is going to be strictly controlled, because it's going to be what we've seen throughout history, that, people will look at, I don't know, say like in the ancient world when, you would have, for instance, Jews or Christians would be very strict about sexuality, right? Where a lot of pagans would not be. Well, the reason they were strict about sexuality is because of the omnipresence of STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. So when you have a smaller, marginalized population that feels threatened by your neighbors, you're not going to want to just risk not only having low reproductive rates, but the risk of sexually transmitted diseases. And now here's a funny thing, and this is something that I've talked about on the blog, is that when you look at particularly the Old Testament, when they use the word sodomite, okay, and everybody goes, oh, they're talking about homosexuals. No, they're not talking about homosexuals. The original word was kadeshim, and what kadesh were transgendered temple prostitutes. So it's like that's who the sodomites were. They were basically transgendered prostitutes that would work in these, like say, Atagardus or somebody, or Ishtar, whatever, whatever goddess would have temple prostitutes. I think they were probably almost entirely transgendered, because when you think about the way that women were seen as basically as property in the ancient world, it doesn't, and also the lack of reliable birth control. I just don't see the advantage in having actual women be temple prostitutes back in those days. So that's what that word means. So whenever you look at those Bible passages that fundamentalists will point out, and then the religious left or the gay community will get all upset about, they're arguing over a word that they don't, or terminology that they don't understand. But this is what I'm saying. It's like this whole idea of sexually transmitted diseases. But here's the problem. They're on the rise again. All right? They are on the rise again. And I'm not exactly sure what it was, but I was hearing that, was it like a strain of chlamydia? But there is either the fear or the beginning of the rise of antibiotic resistant STDs. Okay, so when that happens, I mean, that's just a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, no shit.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like I said, we're gonna reach this crisis. Everything is going to unravel. It's just inevitable. I mean, it's just that, no matter how, I don't know what's going on and what the, again, the national security state is saying or doing to head this off. But, there was a report that came out, from these Pentagon sort of war gamers and think tanks were saying that, basically it's all going to start unraveling completely in the 2040s. And a lot of people that I've been reading, are saying that the late 2020s and the 2030s in particular are going to be, things are just going to get really bad. And, this is just something that we're just seeing a lot of. And again, I mean, it's just something that has just happened over and over again. So what do you do about it? You know what I mean? It's like, you can't change, you can't head this off. You're not the Messiah who's going to, you being anybody listening or anybody hypothetically. I mean, nobody's going to head this off. So we've got to start to think about how we're going to survive this. How are we going to operate within this new reality?
Well, I mean, I think to me, it all goes back to the individual. I mean, it's easy to want to try and tackle it by, I don't know, laws and policies and politics and all that shit that hasn't worked in the past. But I mean, all of it boils down to each of us as individuals. So, I mean, we can't evolve collectively unless we evolve individually. I mean, that sounds really kind of obvious and sillily new agey, but I think that there's something to that. I mean, if we get
I would, let me just say where I would
sure
with that. I mean, I do believe that we need to do so individually, but we also have to do so individually in coalition. Okay, I just have this thing that I'm just striking on more and more in my life. It's just like when I see how things play out and I see where things end up, like things I couldn't really see 10 or 20 years ago, like how they end up. And it's like, I have this thing where it's just like, I just see so many, particularly middle-aged men are just so lonely and isolated. You know what I'm saying? And it's going to happen. It's increasingly going to happen with women. I was just hearing something, somebody like Merrill Lynch or somebody, one of these big Wall Street firms were saying that, women at this point in time, between the age of like 25 and 44, if they're married and childless, that, half of them will die unmarried and childless. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, I don't want people to be lonely. It's just like becoming like a real thing for me. It's like, I don't want people to be lonely. And this is why I've really just become like really soured on the whole occult thing and esotericism and things. Because what it does is that it just drives people off into their own little corners. You know what I mean? And I don't want people to do that. You know what I mean? I there's a time for that. There's a time and a place for that, But then there's a time and a place not for that. And I think we're in a time and a place now where I want people just to come together. I don't want people to be lonely. I don't want people to be isolated. I just had a friend of mine from high school, he just killed himself, you know what I mean? And, somebody who just completely isolated himself from from the world. And I just see this process going on. And it's like, I don't want that to happen. I want people to, even if it's just in a virtual environment, I want people to come together. I mean, I've always been this way too. It's like, I've always, even when I was a kid, I always had like these little clusters of friends, like that I would sort of alternate between, but I was always like trying to bring these clusters together. I always had this thing about like bringing people together who necessarily wouldn't interact or wouldn't necessarily even encounter each other. And this just became a thing for me. So it's like, I don't want people to be lonely. I don't want people to die alone. I don't want to see it happen. And
I agree.
I don't want the whole social media thing and, and just all this kind of stuff to drive people off into these ever shrinking circles, but we're seeing this now. Like I had somebody sending me like this thing where like somebody's on Twitter and like now there's a movement for like people who have like dissociative identity disorder. And I'm just thinking, like, how much smaller are we going to cut the cake? You know, because we're cutting the cake into all these like increasingly obscure sexual identities, and now we're going to start cutting the cake into these increasingly obscure mental conditions, psychological conditions. Like, where is this going to go? You know what I mean? And this is why I'm saying, well, like, you know, when I hear people like I don't know, you see these things on TikTok, or like, you know, these are my pronouns, and, you know, and all this kind of bizarre stuff. And it's always like young girls who are way, you know, just over interneted, you know, basically, you know, I mean, but it's just like, they're always just kind of like divide, you know, it's like this new sexual identity. And then we saw this thing with like IKEA, you know, was creating like couch designs for each you know, it was roundly mocked, you know, even by people in the gay community, which I was very happy to see. But it's just like, how much more, you know, finally can we split this atom, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't seem to be very, I mean, as much about the self as those things would seem to be on the outside, they don't seem to be that empowering. Like, those people seem to be constantly stressed out about
yeah, right. Because they try to get advantage through victimization. So if they can define themselves as this marginalized, oppressed group, you know, even if it's an identity that people didn't even hear about until last week, you know, they think they can use that to leverage advantage. And it's, you know, it's not going to happen. And even like, you know, this larger phenomenon, you know, of wokeness and so on, you know, it's what it really boils down to is like, I'm going to use my identity to leverage, you know, advantage from the mainstream, quote unquote, even though there is no mainstream anymore. There's no such thing as the mainstream.
To get the world to acknowledge my subjective take on myself and reality.
But you know where that came from? And I'll tell you something that has always bothered me, or has bothered me for quite some time, is I wouldn't say that this was the sort of the prime mover of this, but I think it played into this, was this whole idea, this new age idea of like the God within. And you know, maybe I'm going to turn a lot of people off, but when I hear that term, when I hear the term God within, it always bothers me, because what it always ends up is I am God. You know, I have the God within, so ergo I am God. You know what I mean? Like my solipsistic subjective view of reality is divinely sanctioned because I sanction it. And that's what, you know, I mean, this is like a real quote unquote boomer thing. You know, this was a big thing with like the me generation, right? And it was a big part of like the advertising blitzkrieg that was aimed at them, you know, this whole me generation and so on. And, you know, it just really bothers me because and it's been bothering me for a long time, because it's like, I just see how that plays out, where it goes from like the God within to I am God, and my subjective experience of God is the right one. And it just ends up in this lonely, isolated place. And this is like what I'm really, you know, really concerned about, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Most of these woke movements seem to be, I mean, they're really going with the divide and conquer agenda.
That's exactly all it is. That's all it is. That's all it is.
Exactly.
Seriously, that's all it is.
That's the most depressing part to me. Like, we need to be, more than ever, we need to be together. We need to be talking. We need to be around each other. Like, the more that we fragment ourselves off and isolate, whether that be just by ourselves or with like the two friends that get our subjective reality, like, that's okay for a little while, but you've got to check in with the outside. You've got to check in with other people and and have some sort of confirmation that they're human beings too, and that you actually might have a lot more in common with them than you would ever guess.
Well, see, one of the problems too is that so many people are reaching middle age, never having a serious relationship and never having children. Okay. Now I have 3 kids. I mean, my first son was born right after I turned 21. You know what I mean? So from a very early age, I had to take responsibility for another human being. You know what I mean? And believe me, it wasn't necessarily my native inclination, right? You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because I am kind of like this dreamy introvert, right? But it saved my life. I mean, I literally, I don't say that like to exaggerate.
Sure.
I
No,
mean, I really
understand.
believe that it saved my life. It saved me from taking a bad course in my life, because it got me out of my head once in a while. It got me out of like the snake pit inside my head. And that was a good thing, and, and now I have like 3 adult kids, who I can really enjoy their company and relate to. And, it's like my wife and I grew friends. We grew our friends. We grew our social life. So
That's great.
so it's a really good thing. But it's just like, that's just something I took for granted growing up. That you were going to have kids. You were going to get married and have kids. And now it's just like nobody takes that for granted anymore. Quite the opposite. And like I said, I mean, we're going to have like this phenomenon where we're going to have a plurality, if not a majority, of millennials die childless, and things with only children. See, but the government likes this, the government likes to atomize and to remove the family unit, because if you're loyal to your family, you're not loyal to the government, right? So that's the way they like it. But, the whole thing with the woke thing, I mean, this has been pretty well documented. I mean, I've been talking about this for ages, and somehow people caught on more recently. But I've been saying for years, it's like this was because of Occupy Wall Street. Because Occupy Wall Street just scared the living shit out of, a certain aspect of the power structure, for instance, Wall Street, right? So that's, and people have printed out and made memes and graphs of all these, Google Trends where like all this woke shit, and this woke buzzwords and terminology and stuff just skyrocketed immediately after Occupy Wall Street, and it's like, I mean, I know very little about Occupy Wall Street except for what I read. I mean, I never took part in like in a protest or anything. But one thing that I did see is that Occupy Wall Street kind of dovetailed with the whole like Ron Paul thing, because his candidacy. So you had like liberals and libertarians kind of interacting physically at a lot of these movements, and that's like, you cannot have that. You know what I mean? You can't have people coalescing across ideological barriers, and certainly not racial barriers or religious barriers. So that's when the divide and rule, divide and conquer tactics just really kick in. And it was all, and I mean, I don't know how people, I wonder how people cannot see it. I mean, maybe they do see it and they're just afraid to say anything about it. Like, because if you're working in like anything related to the media or academia or something, you cannot break ranks. I mean, the ideological discipline is, it would make, Stalinist Russia green with envy. I mean, it's absolutely complete, and it's literal totalitarianism. I mean, you cannot go against wokeness if you work in anything, that's knowledge working related, knowledge workers and so on. I mean, they have literally just stitched that down completely. You know, if you work in big tech, or you work in the media, or you work in the school system, or the universities, you know, you submit to woke, or you are hounded out of those communities.
And it's not like some of these people are getting canceled because they're neo-Nazis. They're just conservatives, you know? Like they may say something pro-Trump in a tweet or something, and then they get taken down like piranhas.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing that's just so surreal to me, you know, like when you saw all these big riots because, I don't know, somebody like Ben Shapiro was going to,
Yeah.
you know,
Milo.
or Milo, and it's all these like, but really what it was is that it was the system, it was the machine, letting everyone else know that it will brook no dissent, and it will deal with dissent with physical violence, you know, and that's the way it is. The problem is with that is that when you establish that as your precedent, when you establish that as your social norm, and which they've done, I mean, you know, the whatever you want to call them. I mean, I refuse to call them liberals of the left, you know, because I'm an old liberal lefty, right? I don't want to dignify them with that phraseology.
Exactly.
But it's like, you know, whatever whoever they are, you know, Rockefeller Republicrats is what I like to call them, mostly, you know, wearing the skin suit of the old Democratic Party. When you establish those as the norms, you'd better hope that you stay on top of the ideological pig pile. Because once you have established that physical violence and intimidation is acceptable in order to discourage or, you know, stamp out any dissent or opposition, those are norms that are very hard to change.
Yeah, to back out of.
You know, I mean, so you've got a situation now where people on Twitter, you know, who are nominally Democrat, you know, call themselves liberals, you know, are constantly calling for the mass imprisonment of people who they disagree with, constantly calling for physical violence against people who they disagree with, you know, constantly calling for people who they disagree with to be silenced. So what they are now doing is that they are establishing those norms. Now the problem is that these are people with notoriously low birth rates, right? And people whose numbers are really only bolstered by, you know, who they see as, you know, their backup in, you know, black communities primarily, but also, you know, Latino and Asian communities. But what happens when the blacks and the Latinos and the Asians say, we're sick of your white liberal bullshit? You know what I mean? We're tired of it. We see through it. We know that this is just about you trying to get advantage over your rival white, you know, communities or whatever, however you want to classify it. What happens then? You know, so their numbers collapse because people are, you know, people of color, let's just say, are tired of being used as accessories or shields for this, you know, for this woke bullshit. And then they also, you know, inside these communities, they have notoriously low birth rates, and they also have a lot of people who don't really believe in what they say, but are going along because they feel that they don't have any choice to, you know, and then so when that all happens, and then they've already established physical violence against political dissent as the norm, I mean, what kind of situation are we going to end up in? You know what I mean? So, I mean, I think the situation we're going to end up in is like just basically a free-for-all, you know? And this is one thing that I was trying to tell people after the Trump election who were all like talking about let's start a civil war, and I was like, do you understand how that would play out? I mean, it's not going to be Appomattox, right? It's
Yeah,
not
no
going to be,
shit.
what I mean? It's going to be like you can't go to the grocery store because somebody's going to just like shoot you in the face as soon as you get out of the car. It's just like, it's going to be basically, it's not even going to be like on the level of Yugoslavia. It's just going to be a free for all. And people just don't understand that. And I just think like, what don't you understand? Like, what don't you get? You know what I mean? But listen, I mean, it's just like, they're digging their own graves, but they're also digging the graves for the rest of us. But like I said, I mean, the entire system is teetering right now. And I don't see this process changing. I would love to tell you otherwise. I don't like to be like the voice of doom, but I can't see any eventuality that isn't going to end up with systemic collapse.
Well, okay, so there's that scenario. And then there's the scenario played out, put out by the World Economic Forum, Fourth Industrial Revolution, Great Reset. Do you think those two things coincide? Do you think the Great Reset capitalizes on that chaos?
But here's the thing. I mean, this is another thing that I've been telling people. When I look at like those people, like the Davos kind of people, the only thing I sense from them is just fear. You know what I mean? I sense tremendous fear. And it's like this whole Great Reset thing, it's like it's been so half-assed and it's been so stop and start. And like it seems like behind the scenes they're not even like really agreed upon how to even proceed with this thing. It's just, it's just, I get the sense that, with these people, Davos, Bilderberg, whatever, right? I think there's tremendous confusion and chaos, but also tremendous fear. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of the things that we're seeing, a lot of the cancellation stuff and this reaction to that absurd clown show on January 6th, I think there's just a tremendous amount of fear in, these, parts of the ruling class and of the economic class and the financial class. I mean, this is why they're all, and this is when I tell people, it's like, why do you think they're all buying like these islands off the coast of New Zealand? You know what I mean? Like why, or Fiji, or Micronesia, or they're buying basically fortresses deep within the Rockies. Like, why do you think they're getting ready to just bolt for the hills? They're afraid. I'm telling you, they're afraid. There are a number, and this is like what I was writing about, like, a number of years ago that I put in the book. I mean, I remember writing about this like 2014, 2015, when all this stuff came about with like, Silicon Valley survivalism. It's like, they just know, believe me, they know. And they know everything is fake. They know the economy is fake. They know that money has just become totally unmoored from reality. And this is one of the things, like, everybody says, oh, get into crypto and everything. It's like, I'll tell you why. I mean, I love the idea of crypto, right? But what really worries me about crypto is that what about when the internet just stops working, or we don't have reliable internet? The crypto relies on like a state-of-the-art rocket ship, race car, Formula One race car version of the internet running. Without that, there is no crypto. If we're back to like dial-up, there is no crypto.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point, actually.
And we may end up being back to dial-up.
That's really why you wrote the book of blog posts, right? Because you thought the whole internet was going to go up in flames.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was like, yeah.
So
I wrote a book that you can only get to the internet because I thought the internet was in immediate danger of just collapsing.
Oh, God. Well, briefly going back to that, where does the name Secret Sun actually come from?
Well, it's a dream that I had, or a dream that I've had, like a recurring dream that I've had for a number of years since I was a child, where the sun comes out in the middle of the night, but only certain people know about it.
Cool.
And for some reason, swamps and marshes always seem to be, not always, but are often, parts of this. And also, another thing that's also part of the secret sun dream is these weird, secret, hidden neighborhoods in Manhattan, like that are basically suburban neighborhoods that people don't know about, just like any suburban neighborhood, but it's like tucked off in the corner of Manhattan somewhere. And the secret sun is always shining there. So I don't know. I haven't really tried to figure out where all this comes from, but
I like it.
It's something that I've had since I was a kid. But it's funny because those secret sun dreams, it's like I can, even dreams that I had a number of years ago, I can still very vividly picture, I can still really put myself back in that environment, this totally imaginary environment.
Cool. It's like another realm, another world. Do you ever have, and during one of these dreams especially, have you ever had a waking dream, like a vivid dream? Lucid dream, that's the word I'm looking for.
I don't really have lucid dreams. I have extremely vivid dreams. But I don't know if I would actually have lucid dreams. I mean, I've had extremely vivid dreams where I become aware that I'm dreaming.
That's as far as it goes.
That's pretty much as far as it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had one in decades, unfortunately. I had them a lot when I was in my 20s.
But to me, lucid dreaming, I think is it's, I don't want to say it's cheating, but it's just it kind of defeats the purpose. Because the purpose of a dream is to let your unconscious mind tell you what's really going on, through this whole symbolic representational reality. And if your conscious mind isn't intruding on that or imposing on that, then what's the point of having a dream?
Well, why would it be possible then, do you think, to hack into it?
I don't know.
Get back to me with that.
It's to be honest with you, it's never been something that I've been particularly interested in.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's just, to me, it's just the great thing about a dream is surrendering to the reality of the dream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I can agree with that for sure. Yeah, it's like I said, it's been a long time since I've had one, and it was always very short-lived. And as soon as I would start to wake up, I could feel myself coming out of it. And so I'd have to sort of start sleepwalking in the dream again to stay in it. Kind of a balancing act. But yeah, I haven't done that in a long, long time. So one of the things that seems to recur, a theme that seems to come up again through a lot of these blog posts, is the absence of sort of a spiritual awareness in today's society. Do you think that plays a sort of a major role in why things are the way that they are, or why people are, more concerned with externals as opposed to internals?
Yeah, I do. And, but it's not an awareness as much as a consciousness. Because there are all sorts of ersatz spiritualities out there, there's this whole witchcraft thing and Satanism and whatever, I mean, there are all these sort of esoteric systems, but, the people who are involved in them have this very, a curator mentality about them.
Yeah.
A collector's mentality, you know what I mean? It's about, they approach it in the same way that they'd approach collecting vinyl or something. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's it's not something that I can see, because I have this, past couple of years, certainly maybe a little bit more, I've developed not even developed. It's like I've recovered this spiritual consciousness that I had when I was younger. That just came very naturally to me, but I kind of lost as I got older, and I really lost when I got into the drugs for so long. The drugs just wiped it out completely, and I've recovered that, and I'm really grateful for that. But it's like I don't know how I would like communicate or instill that to somebody else. It's like I haven't been able to like. It's almost like when I try to quantify it or I try to define it, it evaporates. So I just surrender myself to it, and like for me, spirituality, it's like I always use the metaphors of the ocean, so I grew up in the ocean, right? And I talk about like, in particular, like when I was a kid, there was this bridge on my father's street, and, we'd jump off the bridge. It was only about like 20, 30 feet high. So it wasn't like, a big deal, but it would also, when the tide would come in and out, like when the tide came in, we'd ride the rapids. And like the first time I tried riding the rapids, I almost drowned. And the reason I almost drowned is because I was trying to, control it. I was trying to control the process. And I didn't realize, I realized the second time I tried that what you just do is that you just surrender yourself. You let the rapids take over. They'll keep you aloft. They'll keep you up. You're not going to drown. You know what I mean? They're going to take you. And it was interesting because they would go under the bridge, and then they would sort of lead to this pathway, this little kind of stone beach, and you could just walk right up and start the process all over again. But it's like, it was a great lesson for me because the ocean taught me that like, you can't impose your will upon it. You have to harmonize your will to its will, because the ocean is boss. I mean, the ocean is the biggest thing, and it's the fucking scariest thing in the world. You know what I mean? And so many people just, if they don't have an experience with the ocean, they just don't understand that it's how vast it is, and just it's a power beyond power. You know what I mean? The power of like a powerful hurricane is like, what do they say? Like, it's like 1 million nuclear bombs. You know what I mean? It's just like this, it's this power that we can't even grasp. You know what I'm saying? And it's something that I sort of got a reminder of when the superstorm hit, when Hurricane Sandy hit, because for some reason it decided, I live about an hour off the shore, and it decided to just barrel through my town. I have no idea like what that was all about, because you figure we just follow, the path up the coast, but it just like barreled inland, and we got caught in the crossfire, so to speak.
Wow.
And it's like, I remember when it first rolled into town, and I'm standing on my porch, just barely standing up because the winds are just knocking me down. And I look up at this fucking vortex in the sky, and is this sound, like a sound that I've never heard in my life. I can't even describe it. If somebody said like, this is what like it sounds like when I don't know, in the center of the universe at a black hole, or, on the great red spot of Jupiter. And this, somebody told me that that's what it sounded like. Okay, that's what it just sounded like, the absolute fury of nature unleashed. And we were seeing like at one point, like there was so much ball lightning on the ground, like hopping down the street, that at one point I thought it was like a cop cruiser going by. And then it's like, I remembered, oh shit, no, there's like that giant tree in the road, so the cop cruiser can't go by. It was like this fucking ball lightning just everywhere. And it was just like the freakiest thing. And if you haven't seen it, like a lot of people have never seen ball lightning.
No, I haven't.
And it's just like, I mean, I swear to God, I'm getting like goosebumps just talking about it. And it was so freaky and surreal. And then like the next day, like we're walking around, and it just looked like, like those newsreel footage of the fall of Berlin, and just absolute devastation everywhere you looked. And, it was a lesson that I needed. I needed to just realize that, we're just ants on the back of an elephant, if that, I mean, maybe we're just like bacteria on the back of an elephant. But, the ocean rules, the earth rules. Nature, one of my new mottos is nature reclaims, No matter what happens, no matter what we build, no matter what we strive for, no matter what we achieve, nature will reclaim. And like some people will get depressed by that or despondent about that. And it's just like, no, it's just like, that's like, these monks who will build these incredible mandalas and then wipe them away when they're done. It's just like, just accept that, accept the beauty of the temporality of it, because nature will always reclaim, But, and the other half of that is nature renews. Nature reclaims and nature renews. So I think that if we come to realize that and come to understand that, then I think that will take a lot of anxiety away. See, I've really come to see like the cities, urban living, it's just, it's not good for us. It's not good for people. I don't believe that we should all become Ted Kaczynski's. That's that exact polar opposite I was talking about, where I don't want, people to become alone and isolated. But I don't want people to be like living on top of each other in these human filing cabinets,
Somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think there is a happy medium. But I think that, because of economics, because of trade, because of industrialism, cities always seem to happen. They always seem to rise up. But cities like have an egg timer on their heads, you know what I mean? It's like cities, the seeds of the city's destruction are always planted in their genesis, you know what I mean? And you just name a city throughout history, you know what I mean? Name a city that didn't eventually fall. A lot of cities have fallen and been rebuilt, right? But the process is just inevitable, and it has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with demographics. It's nature. It's the way things work. And I think just like understanding nature, and it's like, I hate to use that term because, you just picture like some granola commercial from the 1970s, you know what I mean? Or you picture like a bunch of crunchy hippies at like a vegan festival. It's like, I don't want to use it because nature to me is fierce and wild and destructive, as well as being, nurturing and sustaining and creative. You have to accept that dual nature of nature, so to speak. And I want to figure like a good word for it, like a better word, because like I said, nature, it's like it's like a cereal box, with like some cheesy wood cut of like, mountains and a lake or something. It's like it's been commodified just like everything else, But when you're out in nature, it's like, you realize it, and it's like I do think that there is a happy medium. It's like we have to walk this tightrope between artificiality and the natural world, because we need this combination of the two. And I don't think we're ever going to like reach like this nirvana where we've completely harmonized both nature and the human realm, the human sphere. But it's just something to work towards,
Sure, absolutely. Not in such large clumps as like big cities like New York or something like that. But I think nature is important too, and getting out in nature is important because it helps to put into focus the context that we're in. I think a lot of people lack context, and that's why they get fucked up.
I don't think we can have spirituality without nature.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know what
absolutely.
I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult to have like true spiritual consciousness in a completely urbanized environment. And that's why, when you talk about like these ideas that we had of this urbanized Jetsons kind of future, it doesn't work. It's never going to work. You know what I mean? And all we have to do is look at, places like Singapore or Hong Kong or Tokyo or something to see how that plays out. It's like nature is, you cannot separate spirit and nature. And I don't think you can have a truly holistic and meaningful spirituality without nature. You see what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah,
you have to,
for sure.
you have to somehow it's kind of like, nature has like a Wi-Fi. You know what I mean? It's like
For
it
sure.
broadcasts a signal, right? And
Yeah.
it's almost kind of like, but it's a signal, but it's like it's fuel, so it's like it's fuel for the spirit, right? And without that, we just developed this very weird and stunted quasi spirituality, or no spirituality at all. We just become robots. And but the thing is, the other thing that's important too is like, when I talk about these like people who get into like witchcraft or something, and it's like they have this curator mentality, right? And it's just like, no, it's just like, if you're gonna get, first of all, I don't think people should get into witchcraft and all that kind of stuff. And the reason being, like I said before, is that these things always end up with you being alone. You know what I mean? Or either being alone or being in some like sect that has isolated itself and developed like, a very deep adversarial relationship to the rest of society. You know what I'm saying? And like I mean, listen, I think when you talk about like traditional witchcraft and stuff that did, it was very nature based. Obviously, it was very oriented towards nature. But I think that where the problem comes in is that when it always develops into this like, oh, I'm in control of nature. And to me, with nature, it's like you have to cede control, and getting back to what I was talking about with the ocean, and riding those rapids, where if you try to control the movement and the flow, you're going to drown. But if you learn to surrender, and it's a very hard thing, it's a hard thing to learn how to surrender to that. But it's the same thing like, when I'd be swimming out, pretty far from shore, right? But the ocean has this incredible ability to keep you buoyant. You know what I mean? And if you want to stay afloat, you just, it's like you just kind of like lie back, you know what I mean? And just spread out and just surrender and let the waves keep you aloft. And a lot of times when people drown, it's because they're waving their arms around, like doing all that kind of shit. You know what I mean? You've seen that, you know what I mean? And that to me is like, again, I think that's a great metaphor for the spirit, for the spiritual realm. But I mean, listen, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to play out. I'm in no position to dictate to other people how they should live their lives, and I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to have the responsibility of like having to take care of somebody else's life for them. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, when we have things like hero worship and messiah complexes and stuff, it's like people want the adulation, but they don't realize that, when somebody is worshiping you, that they're trying to take energy from you, that they're trying to take your energy from you. And this is why so many rock stars and stuff will become like recluses and everything, because they just can't, they don't have any energy left to feed these strangers who don't see them as anything but like a battery source,
Yep. We're a symbol.
Well, it's the same thing in the end, really.
Sure. Yeah, to me, kind of weaving back into transhumanism, that seems like the ultimate denial of nature. Like,
it's a joke.
Yeah.
It
is.
It's a joke. It's really fallen apart. One thing I say that like 99% of transhumanism was like Ray Kurzweil's
singularity.
Well, his completely neurotic terror of death.
Yeah. And wanting to resurrect his dad.
Yeah, it's just genius is always next door to madness.
Fucking A, yes.
You know what
sure.
I mean? And nobody can deny his genius. You know what I mean? Nobody can deny that he's got the goods, right? But the singularity is never going to happen ever. Because if we do survive this crash we're headed for, this collective car crash we're all headed for, if we do survive it, the only way we're going to rebuild is by taking a much different and more stringent relationship to technology. And this is why, like, I mean, just look at all your sci-fi, look at all your Star Trek, look at all the, your robots, and just throw it all in the garbage. Nobody's ever going to another star system. It's just absolutely ludicrous. I don't think we're ever going to go past the moon, if that, right? I mean, I have just an expression. It's like nobody's going anywhere. You know what I mean? This is our home. Fish, like, do fish want to, like, exist outside of water? You know what I mean? It's like, this is our home. We have everything we need. This planet is unimaginably huge. We are just all clustered together in these tiny little corners that don't even comprise, 5% of the land mass in this world. Never mind the surface, 71% of which is water, right? It's like this planet is huge. There's enough for everybody. There's enough for everybody. Everything we need is here. It's just that we're just so fucked up with greed and solipsism and selfishness and just all this stuff that in some ways did have like a survival mechanism aspect to it, right? But now it's become used, it's like a weapon that's been used, that we made and has now being used against us. It's like, this world is huge. There's enough for everybody. Every living soul on this planet, there's enough land to build homes and plant food, grow food, you name it. There's enough for everybody. There's not enough for everybody in these little clusters, near strategic waterways that we've all, collected ourselves in.
Yeah.
There isn't enough there, right? But the world, the planet, are you kidding me? I mean, one thing that I tell people, it's just like, okay, you're in New York City, one of the most densely populated places in the world, right? Drive out of the city, drive 20 minutes north. You're not going to see anything. You know what I mean? I mean, once you get past, say, like Westchester County, you're going to be driving up to Albany, and all you're going to see is forest as far as the eye can see. I mean, just take a plane over the country at night and just see how few lights you see down there, and how all the lights you see, the electrical lights you see down there, are all sort of, these little clusters, these little hives. But you can, you're going to go, like, say you're going to go to California from New York, right? I mean, you're going to go over that Martian landscape of the Southwest, and you can go hours without seeing shit outside your window. You know what I mean? Nothing. Maybe like a stray light here and there.
Yeah.
But it's just like the world is empty. You know what I mean? It's just that
Fuck yeah.
In order for people to control other people, they need to cluster them all in together. You know what I mean? And that's why this whole Agenda 2030 nonsense and, and all this half-assed Build Back Better and Great Reset, one of the things, I don't think they even take their bullshit seriously. I mean, they know it's just all nonsense. And it's like they've been so half-assed about rolling this stuff out. And like I said, I think it's all just to mask their terror, because all these stupid plans that were originally drawn up in like Victorian smoking rooms by what I like to call, pederastic laudanum addicted toffs, just these nonsensical ideas that people like Darwin and H.G. Wells and all these just absolute lunatics had. They're not going to work. They're never going to work. They never have worked. You know what I mean? The Jetsons and Star Trek. I mean, Star Trek is never going to happen. I'll see people on Twitter, like socialists and communists, say, they'll put some meme from Star Trek and like, this is the future that we want. Well, it's just like, well, why don't you just put like a fucking Lord of the Rings up and say, this is the future you want? Because you're just as likely to live in a Lord of the Rings future as you are a Star Trek future. It's all absolute nonsense. It's never going to happen. Ever, never, ever going to happen. Because even if we did have the technology to build warp speed starships, do we have the resources? Do we have the manpower? I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. It really is. And it's like, listen, I was a sucker for that shit as much as anybody. Hell, I mean, I was more of a sucker for that shit than anybody. I used to love that stuff. But it's all just nonsense. It's just absolute nonsense. And if you look at Star Trek, the only way that it makes any sense at all, or Star Wars or Dune or whatever you want to look at, right? The only way you can make any sense of that stuff is to just look at it as all its allegory for, present day social political situations.
Sure. And most of those futuristic scenarios, the only thing that's advanced is the tech, is the tools. Like, humans aren't advanced. They're still doing the same stupid shit as they did when we had clubs and rocks, that's what I want to see. I want to see science fiction where the people evolve, not the fucking gadgets.
We've devolved. Okay, so listen, do this. All right, go find an old book store in your town, particularly like an antiquarian store, and go look at the books, particularly the children's books that were published 100 years ago. All right, maybe more like Victorian era or whatever. Look at a Time magazine or a Newsweek magazine from the early 1970s or even the mid 1970s or even the early 80s, and look at the friggin' pamphlets that they publish now that look like comic books. You know what I mean? We're devolving. We are devolving. We have devolved as a society. We've devolved as a culture. We've devolved as a species because we are the kind of species that thrives through hardship.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Good point. Yeah. That's the adversity. I mean, once we stop being challenged, I think that's what all of this stuff with this fragmentation and focus on the self, and in a pedantic way, is because we have it so good. Like, we don't have to worry about food and shelter. We worry about what our gender dysphoria and what our identity is and what group and umbrella I'm going to fit under. It's like, we've lost track of things that, we don't have to battle for any of the important things, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's why when you look at a lot of these mental illnesses that are so endemic among young people, they're always clustered towards the top of the socioeconomic spectrum. You know what I mean? Like upper middle class and up, all right? That's where all this stuff becomes epidemic, and all this Munchausen by proxy thing with all these trophy wives who, hit 30 or 40 and don't feel valuable anymore. So they have to buy into these, these sick fantasies that they impose on their children. Listen, it's funny too, because it's like, so I'm a commercial artist, and my wife and I, we've never made a lot of money, right? But it's like our kids are like, these, they look like Vikings, you know what I mean? Like tall, ruddy, healthy, big boned, well-adjusted, successful, intelligent, because they I don't want to say this necessarily, but it's like they didn't live in this world of perpetual indulgence. And I'll tell you, a lot of their friends who, whose parents were a lot wealthier than us, didn't make it. They're gone, drug addiction, whatever, suicide. And it's really sad. It breaks my heart. It genuinely, honestly breaks my heart, because a lot of these kids were good kids, But, like I said, it's like, it's getting back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And once your needs have been met and exceeded, where do you go? Where does your, where do you end up? You know what I'm saying? And, it's like I keep saying, like, we're not the first. Every great empire that's risen to like heights of domination has fallen. It planted the seeds of its own demise. I was watching this thing about why Rome had to fall. It was this video, all these great kind of historians on YouTube. And one thing that he said is that, by like, say, the 2nd century Rome, it's like all the soldiers were German, and all the people who were like clerical workers and stuff were slaves. Because the actual Romans themselves, like Roman citizens, which was a very, very small percentage of the population, wealthy, upper class, people who could buy their citizenship, all their children were like just idiots. Like all the boys and the men were just cream puffs, you know what I mean? And they're all idiots because of the just unimaginable social injustice, of that time and place. It's just absolutely sickening. Just how incredibly unequal it was. But, listen, we're barreling towards that now. If you want to see inequality, social inequality, economic equality, just go to Southern California. When you see like a $500,000 Maserati drive by endless streets of homeless encampments, you know what I mean? Or, have, Brentwood or Beverly Hills, these little islands of insane wealth and privilege, and this surrounded by this crescent of wage slaves, basically, de facto slavery, most, a lot of people who, they're illegal immigrants or whatever, this whole system that is allowed to perpetuate because they can't ask for raises. You know what I mean? And they're totally disposable. It's like all these great Hollywood Democrat liberals, they want an endless supply of disposable labor, incredibly cheap, disposable human beings. They want to use people up, and then when they use them up, throw them away. And that's what Hollywood is all about. That's what Los Angeles is all about. That's what San Francisco is all about. All these places that want to dominate and control the rest of the world and the rest of the country and dictate to us how we should live our lives. It's, for all intents and purposes, it's a modern slavery. It's very, very, very much, like traditional slave systems that we saw in Greece and Rome and China and India, all across the ancient world. There's very little difference outside of nominal differences. We don't call them slaves, but they're enslaved. These people are enslaved by their immigration status. They're enslaved by their income levels. They're enslaved by the shitty schools that are purposely kept shitty by these great liberals like Gavin Newsom. It's like, oh, well, we got to fix the schools. You're never going to fix schools because you want the schools to be shitty, because you want your serf class to be poorly educated and disposable. It's just that but this is what I'm saying about, this is what I'm saying about this future. Like these same people, like the Newsoms and the Pelosi's and, all these plutocrats are creating this situation where political violence is the new norm and it's acceptable. It's like political violence and intimidation is an acceptable way to deal with people who disagree with you. But listen, all these people that are propping the system up, people in South Central LA and East LA, all these people who are just keeping them aloft. They're gonna wise. I think they're wising up now. They're gonna wise up sooner or later. And what's gonna happen then? This is why I as much as people don't want to, people get impatient with liberal democracy. It's the best alternative that we have, because the other alternatives are all worse. And believe me, this ruling class, this new oligarchy, they're going to discover sooner than later, why their forebears thought that at least keeping the pretense of democracy was the best available option. They're going to discover that. Believe me, they're going to discover it, and they're going to regret it. And the smarter ones, like I said, are already heading for the fucking hills, or for the Fiji, the Micronesia, or wherever, New Zealand, wherever they can find a bolt hole to escape to.
To randomly take this someplace else, but maybe not. Maybe it'll all go back to the same place. I don't remember what essay in the book you said this, but you stated that the world is more run by sorcery than science.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the context of that, and what did you mean by that?
It's just a realization that I've come to, that our science and our technology is mostly lies, mostly fictitious. People are sort of deceived by a constant stream of fake headlines that are fed to the popular science press. I'm somebody who's been following science and technology for a long time, since I was a kid. I've always been interested in this stuff. And I when I see like the same bullshit headlines that I saw back in the 80s being recycled again and again, these technological miracles that never, ever, ever materialize. And, just to give you one example, since I was a kid, since I was like a preteen, hearing that, we're just around the corner from a moon colony. There's never going to be a colony on the moon, ever, ever. It's never going to happen.
You don't think that there's a secret space program that already has a colony on the moon?
I think there's a secret space program, but I don't think it has anything to do with colonies. I think it just has to do with, orbital weapons platforms and stuff like that. No, nobody's going anywhere, like I said. Because it's just like, where are you going to go? Forget about flat Earth and all this other shit. It's just like, just look at things at face value. Just look at the way things are presented to us. You go to the moon, where are you going to get your water? Where do you get your water? Okay? You're gonna send like giant spaceships, giant rockets filled with water from the
Portals.
Earth?
Portals,
yeah. Portals. And this is like, this is like one of the things. It's just like this whole fictitious Star Trek nonsense. It only exists to, it's like a carrot, that we're just constantly chasing, because the illusion of progress has to be maintained. The illusion of linear progress has to be maintained at all costs. And it's like people are catching. Look at this thing with like these quote unquote space missions, the Bezos one with the big flying penis.
Yes.
And then the Virgin flying uterus, with Branson. Yeah. So these guys had like all the money in the world and all the time. These programs have been in development since the early 2000s, right? And where do they get to? They don't even get to like low Earth orbit. We're talking like 400 miles below low Earth orbit. They just went up into the upper atmosphere, basically. It's pathetic. And everybody's like, they went to space. It's like, they didn't go anywhere near space. Anywhere near space. They just went like a little higher, comparatively, than like what the U-2 spy planes was doing in the early 60s. You know what I mean? It's in context, they didn't even go anywhere near space. They didn't go anywhere near where the shuttle would go. And they were still very, very comfortably and safely within Earth's atmosphere. Nowhere near space. So, but where are you gonna go? Nobody's going anywhere. It's like these. It's just never gonna happen, because there's no reason for it to happen. Because, just again, let's just take everything at face value, everything as it's presented to us, right? So you go to the moon, which has no water, and you're going to die. You go to Mars, which has no water and has no magnetic field and no sunlight, and you're going to die. It's just crazy. It's just absolute insanity. It's just like there's nowhere to go and there's nothing to do. And you tell me that people are going to like fly out for 6 months or however long it's going to take them to get to Mars? It's absolutely insane. And just put it out of your mind, you know? So getting back to what your question was, I got off on
What's
my
the
tangent
sorcery
again.
part? Yeah.
So it's just like one thing that I've been really tracking, and it really became obvious to me. So I've always been looking at public ritual because there's never been a culture or society in human history that doesn't carry out public ritual. You know, it's just a question of how, you know, what the symbolism is exactly and what the purposes of it. But the thing that really so I've always been looking at public ritual as long as I've been doing a blog, certainly. But I remember the thing that really struck me is back in 2016 at the Gothard Tunnel opening, and like it looked like something from like, you know, Pat Robertson's worst 80s nightmare. You know, it's like it's got this devil and you know, these people are slaves and they're all chained together, and then, you know, it's like all this is like absolute insanity, and then there's a big giant eye outside and these like ghostly figures and all this stuff, and I was just like looking and going, all right, this is next level now. You know, the program has been accelerated. And then, you know, I've seen all this, you know, particularly since that time with the Super Bowl and so on. But you know, and the Olympics as well. So it's like the symbolism of these public rituals has just gotten more and more sorcerous. You know, it's become more and more connected to like the mystery religions and to ceremonial magic and to all these things. And, you know, the more I look into it, it's like, this is not anything new. It's like versions of this have been operating since there was in the United States of America. But I do start to think like, well, why would they do this? And then it suddenly occurred to me, it's like they do it because it works. Somehow they get the results that they wanted. You know what I mean? Because if they didn't, they wouldn't do it.
Sure.
You wouldn't go through all this time and money expense to carry out these very specific rituals with this very specific symbolism if you weren't getting the desired results from them. You know, if they weren't working out the way you wanted to work. And then, you know, when I just started to look at all the symbolism and just everywhere you look now, I mean, really, it's just so obvious.
The G7 summit.
Yeah, you said that, and I wasn't quite sure, like, what you were referring to there.
Well, the row of red-robed figures marching out on that dock.
Oh, that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
just
strange.
recently, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That was Extinction Rebellion, who are just basically a public ritual. You know, one of the things I say is that like the old state religions are all going to return, but they're going to return under the guise of woke. So when they use woke cover, you can't criticize them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's just something I'm seeing more and more. Just this process play out. But so I just realized that this is sorcery, and you know, the more I was learning about how ritual magic worked and so on, and just seeing it play out in public, you know, you just kind of realize that that's the operating system. You know, the technology and all the rest of it, it's just basically plumbing. You know, and we were sold all these science fictional fantasies of where this stuff was all going, but really technological progress stopped a while ago. It just stopped dead in its tracks a while ago. And a lot of it is really kind of bound by the laws of physics, because the laws of physics are going to define the upper limit of your computing power. Okay. But also, you know, all this other stuff, like, I don't know, just all these fantasies they have of, again, like the Jetsons, and, you know, physics really are going to determine the feasibility of that. You know what I'm saying? So, and then you look at the prevalence of like secret societies and so on. One thing I'm looking at is all this Mithraic symbolism, and just saw a lot of pretty explicit Mithraic symbolism at the Olympics, and all the people sort of near the top of the pyramid who seem to have a special fondness for Mithraism. For instance, the Bloomberg people, the Bloomberg Corporation, putting an actual Mithraic temple that was excavated in the basement of their headquarters in their futuristic headquarters in London. That's making a statement, and
Yeah, I would say so.
AT&T has a Mithraic icon in their world headquarters, and which is 3 blocks away from Dealey Plaza. And I don't know, it's kind of a long process. It's hard to boil down, but you really just start to realize that it's this stuff that runs things, and the rest of it is it's like the means, and that's why I call it the plumbing. The technology and the science is just the plumbing, but it's the sorcery that's it's like the base code.
Do you think that I mean, you described ceremonies and stuff like that. Do you think that also involves, like, many people say that these false flags, like the Las Vegas shooting and stuff like that, are sort of Masonic rituals too? Do you think that incorporates into that too?
I would really have to take it on a case-by-case basis. You know what I mean? But clearly there were all kinds of ritual elements to the Las Vegas thing, and a lot of the bigger ones there seems to be. So, make your own decisions. I can only kind of look at the externals, and say, well, yeah, there are clear patterns here that I just see repeated. This is the thing that I really have to stress too, is it's like when you just see this stuff repeated over and over and over and over and over again for years and years and years and years and years, for a lot of people who aren't really tuned into it, they might just think, oh, this is just crazy talk. It's just like, this might as well be Q bullshit, right? But it's just like when you see it over and over again, and you know where the symbolism comes from, and it's just basically like you're recognizing a language. Like, say you go to live in like China or something, you don't know the language, right? But you're going to learn at least enough to get around, because you're just going to hear like things repeated over and over again. You know what I mean? And you're going to make sense of it. Like you're going to hear certain words attached to certain things, and you're going to pick it up. I mean, kids pick it up great, because that's just the way their brains work. But even an adult is going to pick up enough to just get around, right? So, but that's, it's really through the sheer repetition. And for people who just sort of scoff at it, it's like, it's just ignorant, it's just,
Sure.
you're not really familiar with something, so you scoff at it. But it's like when it's the repetition of it, and the patterns and repetition that all just basically write the story for you.
Yeah, I think when you have a mass of people who are very not occult savvy, and that's not even on their menu, like, then it's probably makes it very easy to pull off things like that, because they're never going to go to that conclusion. They're never going to go, oh, yeah, I see what they're doing. That's like an Egyptian ritual that they did, that's never going to happen. So they can do basically whatever the fuck they want. And most people, it'll just go over their heads.
Well, I think more and more people are sort of catching on.
YouTube would tell us that, yes.
I think that, it's slow, and it's, certainly nowhere near the mainstream, but I think a lot of people are just starting to wise up.
Sure.
Because it's just, the more obvious it gets. But, making it obvious is part of the gaslighting too, there's this whole idea of like revelation of the method, right? That you hear a lot. That's just something that this conspiracy theorist guy made up. I think it's just more, it's more like gaslighting, you know. You're not seeing what you're seeing. It's, you're crazy if you think you're seeing what you're seeing, or, you're alt-right or you're Q or whatever the fuck,
Yeah, exactly.
If you just recognize what's, the fist that's punching you in the face, you're imagining it, because that's just not the way the world actually works. And that's, it's just basically that's classical gaslighting, really.
It's outside of the prescribed narrative that you're being asked to buy hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, I like that. Also, that you mentioned in another essay, the wisdom of mystery. That contact with the other realm, which would be the spirit realm, is actively discouraged to disempower us. So we, like I was saying earlier, we don't even know that stuff like that is on the menu. And by we, I mean the masses who aren't, who don't spend a lot of time delving into this stuff. How do you think that happens? Who do you think is doing the discouraging?
I think it's just systemic, but it's also a function of like the need for control, whether it's control over others or just control or an imagined control over, the environment, man versus nature and so on, but it's like, I more and more, I think the more you embrace mystery and not try to define things and not, to just experience something without trying to like write a sonnet about it, or not even a sonnet, like write an instruction manual about it, right?
Yeah.
If you can just experience something without trying to define it and dissect it, I think it's a good way to, to overcome that programming, it's just something more and more that's just like, I can't define this. I can't say what this is from, or I can only observe it happening, and it's very liberating, but it's also, again, like what I was saying about just like surrendering that control, and I just think that, a really true, healthy spirituality is, a lot of it is about surrendering control. So not trying to name things, not trying to like categorize everything that you experience, and just let it happen, just let things happen and experience them. And then, you start to experience them in their fullness, you start to experience them as they are, and not, the names that you try to put on them. You know what I'm saying? When you try to define things, you are trying to control them. And with a spiritual phenomenon, if you can control it, it's probably not very meaningful or profound, and it's certainly not going to help you change your life, because who the fuck are you,
Yeah. Much less trying to repeat it. I think that's where a lot of people, or a lot of us, lose the plot too, is we come across something that is profound to us, an experience that just kind of maybe happens spontaneously. And so we go, oh, wow, that was really profound. I want to repeat that. And it doesn't really work that way.
Except that it's bigger than you. Except that it's, I don't know. It's just, it's just the way I am. And, maybe it's, your mileage will vary, but it's just like, when I stop trying to like tag everything and say where everything's coming from, and especially not try to lapse into like pseudoscience to try and quantify these things. It's very liberating, and it's also just like, you just, you get a better rush, you get a better rush when you just let it happen and experience it and recognize it, than if you say, well, this is, like the quantifiable crystalline, Space Brothers, or what, I don't know. It's like whatever kind of random shit, it's just like, New Age pseudoscience is something that I've become increasingly allergic to, because it's just like, I don't even think that science is, science is recognizable. Science is useful in this realm. So why would just this like kind of made up science? I think people like, they just like the, you know, the appearance of it. They like
For sure.
they like the costume of it. The costume of science. And I'm just like, whatever.
And then there's scientism.
Well, scientism I call Epsteinism because it really was his project. And I'm not saying that facetiously. I mean, scientism scientism is not anything new, but scientism as it came to be defined over the past 10 years or so was Epstein. That was an Epstein project. He was bankrolling it. He was putting the money into it. It had, he was doing so for political reasons or social reasons or whatever. But I think, I think that's been exposed. We know now, I mean, even the mainstream press was exposing how many people at Harvard and MIT and wherever were all on his pad. They're all sucking his dick. So not figuratively, so to speak,
Sure.
financially.
His egg-shaped dick.
Yeah, his egg-shaped money dick, right? We all know that now. So,
Yes.
And, a lot of people who were really getting built up by that. I mean, look at somebody like Richard Dawkins. I mean, he's a laughingstock now. Even his colleagues and his allies have pretty much disowned him. And, a lot of people won't talk about the whole Epstein aspect to it, but
I myself am not familiar with that connection. What is it? What are you referring to?
What, the Epstein connection?
With Dawkins, yeah.
Well, he was taking money from Epstein, and he was going on his little retreats, and it's just all a big, big giant circle jerk.
His name was on the log.
Yeah, I mean, he was going to these symposiums, and Epstein was giving all these people money and all these labs money, and
Gotcha.
or actually, he was funneling money because I don't think it was actually his money, but his backers were giving him money to give to them, and probably get them on tape at Little St. James with like 12-year-old girls, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Ay. I did like that you wrote something about the OA, which I thought was an excellent show. I haven't made it to season 2 yet.
No, you don't need to. It's not necessary.
Okay.
I think the first one is it's the kind of thing where like she told her story, and there didn't need to be another one. And if you watch the movie The Sound of My Voice, which is kind of like basically the dry run for the OA, I recommend you watch that movie. It's actually a very good movie, but it's kind of like the OA in like a smaller portion. But no, I really, the OA touched upon a lot of things that I've been writing about and so on. And I mean, I didn't love the whole thing. I thought there were some sequences and so on that were pretty flabby. But no, I really dug it. I really did dig it.
Yeah, I did too.
But it also had the thing I love. I think it's always really important, like when you do anything about the paranormal or psychic or whatever, to always have like a really plausible counter argument. And I don't know why it is. It's paradoxical, but it's like for me the best paranormal, whether it's dealing with psychics or UFO, whatever you want to, ghosts, whatever. I think it's always best when you present like a really viable and compelling counter argument. It's sort of like the way sugar and salt kind of bring each other's flavor out. You know what I mean? It's that kind of deal. I mean, that's a terrible metaphor, but
I get what you mean, though.
No, but I don't know what it is. It is a paradox. It's very paradoxical. I can't explain why, but I just always have felt that like when you when you have that balance in there, you have the compelling counter argument, and not just like a, Dana Scully kind of like denial thing. I mean, I'm talking about like a really compelling out that for some reason it makes the fantastic seem more plausible, and I don't know why.
I could see that. Yeah. Maybe to if there's any way to draw this to some definable close, is there? I mean, and this is maybe really a silly question, and I just thought of it in the moment. But if you could say there's any string, any line that runs through all of these disparate essays, is there one? Is there something that connects them all besides that they came from you?
Well, I think it's all just like, a search for genuine spirituality and a anti-spiritual world. I think that would be, and it's just basically kind of looking at that same problem from a number of different viewpoints. But like how do we connect to a legitimate spiritual experience in a world that ostensibly is modern and technological? That's what the masses are fed. Like I said, I don't believe for a second that people at the top of the pyramid believe any of that, but they certainly require that we do. So that's basically what it's about. And the argument basically being that the old biblical thing, without vision the people perish. I think without a genuine operant spirituality, civilization dies.
Yeah,
pretty much.
I agree.
It's impossible to have an irreligious society. I mean, you can create like secular religions like woke or communism or Nazism or whatever, but I think that those are always going to fail, and fail badly, and fail rather quickly. So it's just who we are as human beings. We are religious creatures, because religion ultimately, what religion really is like something that can unify people. It's like, what do we all agree on? Well, we have to agree on something that's above our petty interpersonal relationships, right? Because we're always going to have like different viewpoints. So we need to agree on the transcendent, right? So it's like you for a religion to work, it needs to have a transcendence to it. And I would even argue, I think that wokeness not wokeness, because wokeness is just demonic, but communism, has a transcendent goal in mind. It has a transcendent objective, creating like this workers' paradise, right? Like I said, woke was just mentally insane and evil, and was created by, people on Wall Street to divide and rule, right? But I think, communism, socialism, they do have a transcendence. You can agree or disagree with the transcendence that they're striving towards, but I do, and it's something that I can sense. It's like, I can get into that mode, or I can put myself into that mode and sort of see the way those people talk and see the way they see the world, and it's like I can pick it up, like I can really understand that there is a transcendence. A lot of people who are involved in Marxist politics, whatever. They do have the whole idea of paradise on earth, so to speak. The problem is that it's basically what it is. Basically what Marxism is it's Christian dispensationalism, where you just take out the Christianity. Okay. So it's like Christian dispensationalism argues that history is linear, and is moving towards an omega point that's been pre-decided by God. And what communism is like history is linear, and moves through this, moves through the dialectic to this omega point, which is the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? Or, just the stateless state, So I understand that, and I understand that there is a transcendence there, that it isn't just like envy or, resentment, even though a lot of people want to dismiss it as that. I mean, I think that a lot of these people, there's also a lot of overlap with, certain forms of evangelical Christianity and, in Marxism as well. I mean, there are a lot of Christian Marxists out there. So it is just this idea, but it's all based on this idea that history is linear. And I don't believe that history is linear. I think that history, because it is subject to the laws of nature, that history is cyclical. And this is where I disagree with both Christians and Marxists, because to me everything is cyclical, because nature is cyclical, and no one and nothing and no system and no program that we have can exist contrary to the laws of nature. I mean, we can ignore the laws of nature and we can wish to transcend the laws of nature, but we are subject to the laws of nature. This is why I really like the idea of natural law, that if we do survive this car crash, this collective car crash we're all headed towards, this giant interstate civilizational pileup that we're all headed towards, I really do strongly believe that natural law and the understanding of natural law and the understanding of nature and the understanding of the cyclical rhythms of nature would be a very good way to rebuild from the ashes.
I think that we will, because I suspect, and I don't have any hard evidence to back this, but I suspect that this has happened before, or some version of it has happened before. Again, going back to the cyclical nature of things, I think that we've gone through stuff like this before. This is just a different context in a different time period. But yeah, I think
certainly civilizations have collapsed before.
For sure.
One of the things I try to tell people, when you talk about the term or the concept of apocalypse, people are all automatically plug it into this linear, dispensationalist derived understanding of history, or Ragnarok or whatever. It's just like the story has a beginning and an end. And what I would argue to people is that, the story has a beginning and an end, and then it has another beginning, because that's the way nature works. Everything is subject to the powers and the control of nature. So the apocalypse, as I define it, first of all, it's a revelation, it's an unveiling. It's like when all the bullshit that we've come to believe kind of falls away and we see things what they are, and the way they are is a lot stranger than we really ever hoped that they would be, right? But also the the whole idea of there have been apocalypses, great civilizations have risen and fallen, and you don't have to start talking about Atlantis or Lemuria or Mu or Hyperborea or whatever. I mean, just look through what we accept as history. Look at the whole idea with the sea peoples. That the 18th century BC, there was an unimaginable that every kingdom fell, all at once, and then there was this mysterious army of sea people, people coming in on these boats that were just laying waste to the Hittites and on and on and on. You know what I mean? Like all these great kingdoms that thought that they were the top of the heap and we're going to live forever were just reduced to nothing. So, I mean, or, look at the fall of Rome. I mean, there have been great collapses, throughout history. And, a lot of them are due to unforeseen events like massive volcano explosions or whatever. But, it's not unknown, so.
Could be the thing bubbling under Yellowstone Park. That could be
God, don't even say that. No, I'm not kidding, man. That scares the shit out of me.
I know. I laugh nervously.
See, this is one of the things I say. So politics, race, nationality, it's like these things are major problems, right? But they're ultimately negotiable. You can come to some sort of détente at the very least. If that shit goes up, that's it. We might as well just be wiped off the planet en masse, because not only is that going to destroy basically the entire, North America or west of the Mississippi, right? And when we're talking Mexico, Canada, California, all the way to the Midwest, it's just going to be gone. It's just going to be gone. The nuclear winter, so to speak, that will arise from that, it'll probably kill off at least probably 90% of humanity, or just biological life. So yeah, that's something that and again, that's happened along. There's already been 5 mass extinctions that we've been able to identify. So that could be.
So on that note, guys.
No, seriously. So we're talking about a lot of dark stuff and pessimistic kind of stuff, but it's just like, enjoy your life, reach out to people, enjoy the company of others, seek the spirits first and foremost, seek the spiritual realm, seek the guidance and the wisdom of the spiritual realm first and foremost. Commune with nature, because both of those two are intertwined. Commune with the natural world. Don't retreat. Don't become a monk or a hermit. Don't become somebody who holds himself away to study, the great mysteries of the sages and the mages of times gone by, because the sages and the mages of times gone by all died miserable and alone. All right, so seek to build bridges with other people, seek to make connections with other people.
Absolutely.
There are no guarantees. There have never been any guarantees. Anybody can just drop dead at a moment's notice, be hit by a car. I don't know, a stray meteorite can just crash right through your skull. Enjoy your life.
Take nothing for granted.
Take nothing for granted. Be grateful and be grateful. Have gratitude, an attitude of gratitude.
Absolutely.
So
amen.
Just accept uncertainty and accept mystery and accept your temporality, and I think that will go a long way into just increasing your happiness, as paradoxical as that may sound.
Absolutely. And if you're happy, that's one more step towards everybody else being happy. So if we all get happy, God, what am I leading into? A Marlo Thomas 70s after school special.
No, that was Partridge Family. Come on.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, world is a song that we're singing.
Come on, get happy.
Whole lot of love, it is what we'll be bringing. Where a dream go traveling together.
Yes, I think that's a absolutely positive note to end up on, which I think is something that I like to do. We do talk about a lot of dark things. We did in this episode. We do on many episodes in the Melt, but I try and bring it around to something graspable and something that you can, people can actually do something about. Often that comes back to the self and being present and, like you said, not taking anything for granted, communing with nature, all of that. It's just an answer to most of life's questions.
Rock on.
Rock on.
Rock on. That's the answer. Rock on. To all of life's problems.
Absolutely. Thank you once again, Mr. Knowles, for chatting. It's been wonderful and enlightening and informative.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. And where can people get your vast tome of a book?
On Amazon.
Okay. I can have a link in the episode notes.
Yes.
And is there any other place that you'd like to send them?
secretsun.blogspot.com, and that will get you wherever you need to go.
Fabulous. All right. Thank you, Chris. Let's
Thank you.
do it again sometime in the relatively near future.
Let's do it.
All right. Take care.
Rock.
If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to The Melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make The Melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word to friends and family via social media, email, or word of mouth. And lastly, if none of those options are readily available or appealing to you, simply send your positive thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.